Okay, good morning, everybody. November the 8th. Let's get started. John records one of the most poignant events found in all of the gospel accounts. While Jesus is in Perea, he learns that his friend Lazarus is seriously ill in Bethany, near Jerusalem. Jesus, of course, wants to be with Lazarus despite his fearful disciples' counsel against returning that close to Jerusalem. Knowing that Lazarus has died, Jesus immediately sets out for Bethany. What follows is a touching account of Jesus meeting Lazarus' sister, Martha and Mary, and being moved to tears. Then, although it has been 4 days since Lazarus has died, Jesus goes to the tomb, raises Lazarus from the dead. This, of course, is such a dramatic and conclusive demonstration of Jesus' power that his opponents call a hasty conference and immediately plot to kill Jesus. I wonder what the name of that conference was called. The Let's Murder the Messiah conference. Aware of the danger, Jesus draws northward to the town of Ephraim near the wilderness. Picking up in John chapter 11. Now, a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Such a confusing sentence. And then he said to his disciples, "Let's go back to Judah." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they will see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Well, Lord, if he's sleeping, he'll get better. Let laying dogs lay, right? He'll get better." Jesus had been speaking, though, of death, but his disciples thought he had meant natural sleep.
So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Now on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than Bethany, 2 miles from Jerusalem. And many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." Now, after she said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." Okay, when Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the people of Judea. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples.
Hey,
Yeah.
so Todd, you recently did a sermon on this text.
Yeah.
Tell us, teach us, oh Rabbi.
You know, Mark, in the prelude there that you read, they said that Jesus immediately went, but he didn't.
Yeah, immediately
He
after taking a few days.
Yeah, immediately after taking he and so there's a lot in there about why when it says because he loved them, he stayed where he was.
Uh-huh.
Why would he on purpose? What was there? And it's interesting because one of the questions that comes up is, if Jesus loved them, why wouldn't he just heal Lazarus with a word? Because we have plenty of places in the Bible where Jesus did that, right?
Yeah.
He healed someone with a word from the distance, and why would he not do the same thing here? Because he could.
Yeah, like with the centurion who came to Jesus and he said, never have I seen such great faith, and the centurion had said to him, I command legions. I understand that if you just give the word, my son will be healed, and Jesus gives the word, and his son is healed. So you have those kinds of stories where he doesn't need to get up and go anywhere, right?
Right, and I think that in this particular case, as Jesus is approaching the end of his ministry on earth, he was after something more.
Sure.
And by choosing to delay, and by choosing to have Lazarus die, the impact of what he was about to do was far more significant.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the results of how the leaders, how the religious leaders decided to respond. It's like, we can't have this guy going around raising the dead. We gotta do something. But the number of people who chose to believe in him
Mm-hmm.
because of that event, and so the power of the event, much of it came in his decision to delay that time frame.
So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, well, let's go back to Judah. Now, the disciples aren't excited to go back.
Right.
In fact, kind of a fun phrase, was it Thomas named Didymus?
Yeah. Yeah. He said, okay, well, then let's go die with them.
and I think what he means is let's go die. I think he's telling the disciples, let's go die with Jesus. I think he's
Right.
like, I think Jesus is about to go get himself killed by doing this. Let's go die with him. Let's just, let's go with Jesus and go get stoned to death.
Yeah.
I think his anticipation and the disciples' anticipation was that, which I think raises a whole nother interesting kind of an idea that here they are willing to say, he said to the rest of the disciples, this might cost, following Jesus in this moment, it might cost us everything. That's a great commitment. When you believe that it's going to cost you your life and you choose, that's where you discover what courage is like. You don't really know you're courageous until you face death and do what you believe is the right thing anyway. That's when you start going, wait a second, we just witnessed some significant courage. Glenn, what did you observe?
Well, I
just bring you on here just to be a pretty face.
Yeah. Well, that would have been a big mistake. Even what I wrote in the chat was even Jesus had to choose his words very carefully. I don't know if you're following the chat, but Dave mentioned that if Jesus hadn't called Lazarus by name, that all the graves would have been emptied.
That have been something.
I hadn't known that before, so that was great, Dave. Thanks for that. But even Jesus had to be very careful of every word that he gave, especially when he was doing miracles.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking along the same lines. That was pretty interesting what Dave said about he had to call Lazarus by name, otherwise all graves would have been risen. And it kind of goes along with what we were talking about and how God still works, how Jesus still works in our lives today, his timing. I mean, we constantly are talking about and reminding each other, he doesn't make everything happen all at once, right when we need it. He doesn't necessarily answer a prayer or show us everything we need to see right away, because there's a deeper purpose and meaning going on that only God knows. And like, even just think about that with just this year in our country. We keep relating everything back to it, but it's like crazy stuff going on. But when we talk about God being in control, it's like there's a bigger picture. He's got a bigger plan. And if we saw it all, if he did it all now, it wouldn't be as meaningful, or something would be missing, or someone would not grow or learn what they need to. And so I feel like this story relates to all of that. It's like we see a physical human picture of how Jesus' timing works.
Yeah. Excuse me, Mark, one of my favorite movies is called Remember the Titans. And there's a line in during one of the games where, because there had been conflict between the head coach and the assistant coach.
Is that Denzel Washington?
Denzel Washington, yeah. So throughout the story, there's conflict between the head coach and the assistant coach, because many people thought the assistant coach should have been the head, that whole deal. But there's one point where there's a game where they come together as coaches, and one says to the other, the assistant coach says to the head coach, leave no doubt about, us, as a team or whatever. And I think about this because, again, one of the other reasons why Jesus delayed is there was I don't know if folks remember this or not, but there's a commonly held belief back then that if a person died, their spirit floated around a little bit for a few days, and that it was a Jewish held belief and a kind of a pagan belief. And so the other thing that I wonder is, if Jesus had gone back inside of this 3-day window, would people have had the opportunity to say, well, Lazarus' spirit, just kind of was hanging around. So Jesus didn't really do anything. So because of the way Jesus handled this, he really left no doubt that he was the resurrection and the life. He
Mhm.
took away all that doubt with all of the things that he did.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was like if and it probably had to do with just the lack of modern medicine that we now have today. That if you appear dead, that sometimes I think probably within a day or maybe even 2 days, someone kind of started breathing again, and so they had these occurrences where they seemed dead, but evidently not dead, and so they needed a weekend at Bernie's just to demonstrate that this guy was dead. Um,
Right.
and, uh, and and once he was dead, then they could demonstrate the power of God because it was somewhat natural that periodically they made a mistake and
Another thing that I picked up on, Mark, was the sentences about walking in the dark and the light.
yeah,
He makes a point that when everything is light, everything's good. You don't really need much help.
you can walk it. You can walk when the light of the world is shining on you.
Right.
Harder to walk in the dark.
Correct. And it's not until things get really bad that you really need Jesus and God to help you through those dark times.
Yeah. If you happen to catch today's sermon online, I'll be making a similar point along the way. Or you know what? For me, and then we'll go look at some of these questions. The two most important sentences, or I guess there's three sentences. The two most important paragraphs are these top two, where I think Jesus is setting the stage in a very real way for his disciples primarily, others as well, and the idea that you turn to the Father in times of crisis, and you pray to Him and watch as He doesn't do incredible things in your life, and so here he is crying out to God, Father, I thank you, right? I thank you. I'm about to do this thing. I thank you that you've heard me. I know you always hear me. But I'm not even talking to you because of what I need. And I know you always talk with me. I mean, it's like he has this great demonstration of powerful, united prayer, and then makes the statement, this is for them that we're having this conversation because I want them to believe that you sent me. I want there to be no doubt in their mind that you're at work here. And I want them to have an understanding and a clarity of the purpose that you've called us in bringing the dead to life. And I think there's something really, really profound in this very short descriptor of what was a uniquely important moment for Jesus with his disciples in relationship to the power of prayer. This is possibly one of the most important small snippets of prayer in all of the scripture because Christ said it is, right? I am having this prayer, God, right now with you before this miraculous event for them. I want them to catch something here. I want them to see something here. And then it gets recorded, not for their own memory, right? John doesn't write this so that he goes, I don't ever want to forget that. I better write this down. He writes this down for us. I mean, he's writing this down for those who would come after to recognize, wait, the power and presence of Jesus' actions and activities were being directed straight from heaven. And I think there's something really, really uniquely powerful in this paragraph. And then Jesus called out in a loud voice, let's go, pal. I think there's something really crazy about that. He has this conversation and then calls out to Lazarus. It's time for us to get out of the grave.
Yeah,
Part of that inspired me. I live about 100 feet from the open desert, and I've been trying to get into the habit of going for a morning walk after the Bible reading. And so yesterday I went out, and I don't know what the inspiration was, but maybe I do know. And this also reflects back to what Chris was talking about, trying to start the day with prayer. And it's a habit I'm trying to develop. But all of a sudden, as I'm walking through the desert, I was inspired to just start talking to God, just to pray out loud. I'm glad there's no one around out in the desert, or they have thought I was nuts, because I'm out there just talking to God and asking him things and telling him things about my life. And for whatever reason, I was just inspired once I was out there by myself, just walking along.
Yeah. I think there is something really powerful about writing down your prayers or speaking your I think in our minds we can get so distracted and it becomes way less conversational and way more of a of a pinball game where it's it's just hard to keep these thoughts working. But when you can write them down or you speak them out, it seems like a greater clarity in prayer emerges. Um, and now, just as a little note, I mean, I saw you stumble over this one phrase, and understandably, that Bethany was less than Bethany, 2 miles from Jerusalem. So when it's said that way, he's in the garden community of Bethany. It's like he's in the suburb of Bethany. And so Bethany had emerged a little, which isn't a big town, but then down the river, there's another little town called Bethany, not big enough to call it anything else. It's the little Bethany. It's just down the road from Bethany. And so it's a little confusing as you were reading that, but that's what's happening in that passage, Todd. All right. In what ways has God used sickness in your life or the life of another to bring someone to himself? Anyone have any stories about the way with which things were looking poorly and still God seemed to move?
I feel like that's kind of the story of my life and most of ours. But really, like I know, like I really struggle with some real mental illness stuff, and I've taken medication for it most of my life, and it's a hard struggle, but the majority of times that I feel like God has continually used me and worked through me, there's usually some kind of relation there, and where I can connect with people, and a lot of times it's young people, and I can connect with teenagers that are struggling, that aren't being understood by their parents and or anyone else or teachers, and I understand a little bit, and it's amazing and it's beautiful because that's how God works. He works through those things and through our imperfections and uses us that way, in the same way that his timing is amazing and mysterious and beautiful. The way he works through our sicknesses is the same way. I mean, testimony is everything. And you watch people whose lives are completely changed by it makes me think of some people that we went to high school with. My dad was a big influence in the lives of these kids. He did a lot of youth ministry when I was younger, and he always had the crazy kids in his group. And half of those kids are pastors now. And I mean, these guys are on drugs and like just gone, horrible family situations, And I remember the story of one of them got saved, and one of these kids got saved and just had one of the like he was a different person, totally different person, just turned around. And it was one of those testimonies where, regardless of my testimony, I look at him and I'm like, whoa, God, Jesus is real. Like, that's not normal. And he ran into his friend like at a gas station or something, and his friend wanted to sell him some drugs, and he sat down and led him to Christ right there. And it's because of they understood each other's sickness, they understood each other's addictions and problems. So when his friend saw how much he had changed and how real it was, there was no doubt. He's like, well, I'm going to be a Christian too then, because this is real. And God used those issues and sicknesses to relate to somebody and change them. And that's how he works in ministry,
Well, yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Thanks for sharing that, Josh. I appreciate I've always appreciated your vulnerability with how you're working out that with some fear and trembling. Sometimes it's a massive pain, but
Yeah.
it's always good.
Well, you've been a big help with it for sure.
Oh golly. I think that part of the piece of that that's hard, I think, for those of us that do love you and walk with you, is how easy it is for us to see your gifts and your talents, and how really ridiculously grateful we are to be walking in ministry with you, and how often you don't see that. And man, I just
Yeah.
my life, you see your life through my eyes. Why are we sometimes disappointed by God, and how should we respond to disappointment?
Mark, thinking about that, there was a point in time when Martha and Mary both, expressed a little bit of disappointment in Jesus. If you, or at least that's how I read into it. If you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. Not to suggest that they are blaming Jesus, but the disappointment is because you weren't here, because we feel that if you were here, none of this would have happened. And sometimes I think what the message is, what I took away from that is they were disappointed. They didn't see what the end result was going to be, because if they had seen the end result, they would not have been disappointed, because they would have realized that it's just that what we want isn't happening yet. And I think sometimes we get disappointed maybe with God because of a prayer that's been unanswered, when maybe really the answer is, this is not for this time. There are things that you do not understand. There are things that you don't see. And so while you may feel disappointment now, the day is going to come when it will be revealed to you what was happening back then. But you just don't see it yet. You don't see the whole picture. And so I think that leaves us disappointed because we just don't understand. We just don't see it all.
Todd, I think that's the hardest thing for me when we have prayer, especially for some things that are severely important in our lives. When a loved one is sick or on their deathbed or passes away, we're so disappointed that we prayed for God to heal and it didn't happen at that time. And it's really, really hard to understand that there's a bigger picture out there that we don't see, because we're just focused on that one little thing.
Very true.
Whether it's in relationship with God or whether it's in relationship with other people, I think sometimes often this can be the case with family, with our kids and or with our spouses. But something that's really helped me is to think of it in relationship to like two different bowls or cups, where one cup we'll call expectation and the other cup we'll call desire. And for example, when Elizabeth and I got married, we had all kinds of desires as we moved into our marriage, and the relationship was really, really good. And the minute she said, I do, all sorts of desires somehow moved. I'm going to mute you for a minute, Glenn, because I've got a reverb from your microphone. But for some reason, all these great desires that we had for our relationship kind of got transferred into the expectation cup. And, and when things live in the expectation cup, it's easy for disappointment to emerge. When Mary and Martha had this idea that, if Jesus had been here, we expected he would have healed had he been here earlier, right? When it was just the desire, it was like, oh boy, I hope Jesus shows up because he could really do something. And then it moved into the expectation, like, had you been here, it would have been different. A couple of just real practical examples. We have desires about what kind of house you're going to have, what kind of money you're going to make, what kind of kids you're going to have, how helpful the person's going to be around the house. If that's in the desire category and the person does that, then they have lived up to or exceeded what you maybe imagined. You desired it, it happened, and the reality is you feel grateful. Gratitude is the reflection of a desire being met. When you expect something, I expect that the dishes are going to get done. I expect the lawn is going to get mowed. I expect the house is going to get cleaned. When you live in that, I expect that Jesus is going to heal. When you live in that place of expectation, if you don't meet that expectation, you wind up with disappointment. And if you meet that expectation, that's no big deal. You just did what was expected. There's no reason for gratitude. We live in relationship with God or our spouses or our families is that we live in that world of expectation and not in the world of desire. So I would just look at something like this and say, why are we sometimes disappointed with God and how should we respond? Well, I think we're disappointed with God because we've expected things from him. I think the real reality is if we want to live without that disappointment is we need to desire things from him rather than expect things from him. And that's true from him and for others in your life that are important to you. When you have faith in God's ability to work out impossible, when have you had faith in God's ability to work out impossible stuff in your situation?
Well, it's scary because most of the time I don't have enough faith in those situations. I wish I had more, but I know they're there.
Any examples?
A number of years ago, we had encountered ourselves in a situation with some significant debt, and it was devastating for a period of time to try to figure out how we were going to navigate and resolve this. And it was a dark place. And about a year ago, I guess now, that was all remedied, but it took about 12 years to kind of fix what had been broken. But I remember in that time when sort of the realization of what the magnitude was that we were dealing with, and how God in bits and pieces showed himself in different ways where we could see his hand was at work, bringing about, a correction to this thing, but that it took a long time. Now you can look back on it. I think sometimes the ability to look backwards is really important. I think about, the story of Lazarus. We've got the benefit of looking back because we knew how the story ended. They were on the front end of it and they couldn't see it until it actually happened. We've got the benefit of saying, okay, we see how Jesus can work because we've got documentation of it. But when you're in the middle of it or when you're on the front end of it, that's when it's hard.
I think this would be an example that definitely winds up in your book, this story in the scripture, right? Because this is a perfect example. Remind me of the title of the book, or should I remind you?
It is the title is From Mountains to Speed Bumps: A Perspective on Life Through the Rearview Mirror.
When they were moving towards the days of leading up to Lazarus' death, and even putting him into sackcloth and or into the burial clothes and robe, and putting ointments and oils and all of that on his body and preparing him for burial, and then bringing him to the tomb and putting him in the tomb. I mean, those were mountain moments, right?
Yep.
And filled with disappointment, filled with ideas of what life could have been and dreams that they had that suddenly were shattered, and then in the rearview mirror, not such a big deal at all. What they thought was going to be something they could never overcome, they overcame. And yet we have the reality of the perspective that he's long gone now, so 100% of us still die, right? And so we better sort out this eternity business so that we might actually have life that goes on forever. Todd, why don't you pray that we get a better perspective through the rearview mirror?
Amen. Yes, Lord, thank you. Thank you again for your word. Thank you again for this time of study and reflection and learning and growing, Lord. And I'm reminded that we oftentimes find ourselves in the middle of situations that we just can't see our way out of. And certainly the story of Lazarus is one of those times. And for those of us who are together right now, any number of us could be in that moment where we're not sure what comes next. And Father, I'm reminded that even though our vision only goes so far, your vision spans eternity. You see what lies in front of us. You know what's come behind us. And Father, today we can just rest in that. Lord, it's a beautiful morning, and it's a reminder of your grace and your goodness and your creative power. And my prayer for us today is that that whatever our situations and circumstances, we would just take time to rest in you, and that we would just take time to trust and lean on you, Father, and that you would reveal yourself to us in whatever way is best for us, but that we can trust that you're in control, that you have what our best interest is at heart. And Father, I just ask your blessing on each one of us today. Give us a wonderful day today in your precious Son's name. Amen.
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 Thank you so much. And Josh Poole and Glenn Christensen, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on the panel this morning. I know that was unexpected, and appreciate your being here.
Great
would
morning.
like to invite all of you to join us online this week for church, as due to COVID we have shut the operation down. So come hang out with us online at 9 and or 10:30.
And I'll put in a commercial. If you didn't watch it last night, folks, you need to jump on at 9 or 10:30. There's some good stuff going on there.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
I'll be
Gabe.
there.
Blessings on you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Live in that
Hope you all.
place of desire, not expectations. See you again.
Amen.